The dust-covered stranger rode into Redemption Creek with nothing but his name, a weathered past, and a promise he'd made to himself long ago to never look away from suffering again, especially when the April sun of 1871 revealed a sight that would forever alter his path through the untamed Texas frontier. Chains of mercy. Xander Faulkner pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of Redemption Creek, a small settlement nestled in the Texas Panhandle. The journey had been long, and both he and his faithful stallion, Midnight, were exhausted. His tall frame was shrouded in trail dust, his dark hat pulled low over piercing blue eyes that had seen more than their fair share of hardship in his 32 years. The town seemed peaceful enough, a single main street lined with the usual establishments. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a small church at the far end. But Xander hadn't come to settle. He was just passing through, as he had been for the past 5 years since the war ended and he lost his family ranch to fire and debt. "Just one night, Midnight," he said, patting the horse's neck. "Then we'll move on." He guided his horse toward the livery stable, where a young boy no more than 12 greeted him. "Take good care of him," Xander said, handing over a coin. "He's earned his rest." "Yes, sir," the boy replied, eyes wide at the sight of Xander's worn gun belt and the visible scar that ran along his jaw. Xander made his way to the saloon, where he ordered a whiskey and a hot meal. He sat alone, as was his custom, observing the room from a corner table. The saloon was relatively quiet for the early evening, a few locals playing cards, a piano player softly tinkering out a melody, and the bartender polishing glasses. "You passing through?" asked the bartender as he delivered Xander's plate of stew. "That's right," Xander replied, his voice low and graveled from days of little use. "Name's Will Turner. Don't get many strangers these days unless they're heading to the new settlement about 20 miles east." Xander merely nodded, not one for idle conversation. "Well, enjoy your meal," Will said, seeming to understand Xander's desire for solitude. As Xander ate, he overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Talk of cattle prices, the railroad possibly coming through, and then something that caught his attention. That old Kruger place. Been abandoned since that tragedy 2 years back. Shame what happened to Jacob Kruger. Good man. I heard Hollister moved in now, mean sort, keeps to himself mostly. Good riddance, I say, that land's cursed. Xander wouldn't have thought twice about the conversation, except for the mention of the name Hollister. During the war, he'd known a Lieutenant Hollister, a cruel man who'd taken pleasure in tormenting prisoners. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. After finishing his meal, Xander secured a room at the small hotel across the street. Sleep came uneasily, as it often did, his dreams haunted by memories of gunfire and the faces of those he couldn't save during the war. Morning arrived with a gentle rain. Xander had planned to leave, but something about the conversation he'd overheard the previous night nagged at him. He decided to delay his departure and learn more about this Hollister. At the general store, he purchased supplies while casually inquiring about local ranches. "The Kruger place." The shopkeeper repeated, "That's about 5 miles north, not much to see. Hollister bought it cheap after Kruger died, keeps to himself that one, not friendly like Jacob was." "Any family?" Xander asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Hollister, not that I know of." "Lives alone as far as anyone can tell. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering where I might find work if I decided to stay," Xander lied smoothly. The shopkeeper laughed. "You'd have better luck elsewhere. Hollister doesn't hire help." With his supplies purchased, Xander left the store and made his way back to the livery. Something didn't sit right. Perhaps it wasn't the same Hollister he'd known during the war, but his instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive all these years, told him to investigate. He saddled Midnight and rode north out of town. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and the ground soft beneath Midnight's hooves. The Texas landscape stretched out before him, rolling plains dotted with mesquite trees and occasional rocky outcroppings. After riding for nearly an hour, Xander spotted a dilapidated homestead in the distance. As he approached, he could see it had once been a respectable ranch. The main house was a two-story structure that had seen better days. A large barn stood nearby, and several smaller outbuildings were scattered around the property. A corral held a few horses, and cattle grazed in a pasture beyond. Xander stopped at a rise overlooking the property and studied it carefully. There was movement near the house. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying what appeared to be a rifle. Even from this distance, Xander recognized the gait. Lieutenant Edgar Hollister had indeed found his way to this remote corner of Texas. Deciding it was best not to approach directly, Xander circled the property, keeping to the cover of trees and higher ground. As he made his way around to the back of the homestead, he noticed a small shed about 100 yards from the main house. It was a crude structure, with a padlocked door and a small barred window. Curiosity piqued, Xander dismounted and tied Midnight to a tree. He moved stealthily toward the shed, keeping low and using the uneven terrain for cover. As he drew closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of a child crying. Xander froze, listening intently. Yes, there it was again, definitely a child's sob, followed by a woman's hushed voice trying to offer comfort. What in God's name was going on here? He crept closer until he was at the back of the shed. The crying had stopped, but he could hear movement inside. Finding a small gap between the wooden planks, he peered in. What he saw made his stomach turn. A woman, thin and pale but with a quiet dignity about her, sat on a dirty pallet in the corner. Her dark hair was matted, and her dress was tattered. Around her were 4 children, 3 boys and a girl ranging in age from perhaps 4 to 12. Most shocking of all were the chains that bound the woman and the oldest boy to a metal ring bolted to the wall. Xander pulled back, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he'd expected to find. Hollister had imprisoned a woman and her children like animals. The rage that built inside him was tempered only by the need for caution. One wrong move could endanger the captives further. He needed to know more before he acted. Moving back to where Midnight was tethered, Xander decided to wait until nightfall. He would observe the property, try to determine Hollister's routine, and then formulate a plan to free the prisoners. As the sun began to set, Xander watched as Hollister emerged from the main house and walked toward the shed. The man carried what appeared to be a bucket and a small bundle. He unlocked the shed door, entered briefly, then exited, carefully locking the door behind him. From his vantage point, Xander couldn't see what transpired inside, but he could guess that Hollister was providing some meager rations to his captives. Hollister returned to the main house as darkness fell. Lights glowed from the downstairs windows, and Xander could occasionally see Hollister's silhouette moving about. After about an hour, the lights went out except for one upstairs window, which Xander presumed was Hollister's bedroom. He waited another hour to ensure Hollister was likely asleep before making his move. The night was clear, with a half moon providing just enough light to see by. Xander approached the shed cautiously, his hand on his revolver. At the door, he examined the padlock. It was substantial, but not impossible to break with the right tools. Unfortunately, he hadn't come prepared for this. He moved to the small window and peered inside. In the dim moonlight filtering through the bars, He could see the woman and children huddled together on the pallet, seemingly asleep. He tapped gently on the window. The woman's head shot up immediately, her eyes wide with fear as she scanned the darkness. "I'm here to help," Xander whispered. "My name is Xander Faulkner." She moved cautiously toward the window, keeping the chains from rattling. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Did he send you?" "No, madam, I'm just passing through. I saw what's happening here and I want to help you and your children escape." She studied his face through the bars, suspicion warring with desperate hope in her eyes. "I'm Olivia Kruger," she finally said. "These are my children. This was our home until Thomas Hollister came 2 months ago." "The Kruger place," Xander murmured, pieces falling into place. "You're Jacob Kruger's widow," she nodded, a flash of pain crossing her features. "My husband died 2 years ago. I've been trying to keep the ranch going with just the children and me. Hollister claimed he had papers saying Jacob owed him money, that the ranch was his now. When I disputed it." Her voice trailed off and she glanced at her sleeping children. "I understand," Xander said, his jaw tightening. "I'm going to get you out of here, Mrs. Kruger, but I need time to plan. That padlock is too strong to break quietly. He keeps the key on him always," she said. "I'll be back tomorrow night with what I need. Can you hold on until then?" Olivia looked back at her children, then nodded firmly. "We've endured this long. One more day won't matter. Try to rest. And Mrs. Kruger, don't lose hope." She met his eyes through the bars, and Xander saw a flicker of something strength, perhaps, or determination beneath the weariness. "Hope is all we have left, Mr. Faulkner." Xander returned to midnight and rode back toward town, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. One thing was certain by this time tomorrow. Olivia Kruger and her children would be free, and Thomas Hollister would answer for his crimes. The next morning, Xander visited the general store again, purchasing items he would need. A sturdy file for the chains, a small pry bar, and extra ammunition for his revolver. He also bought food, preserved meats, bread, cheese, and apples, knowing the prisoners were likely undernourished. "Planning some work?" the shopkeeper asked, eyeing Xander's purchases. "Just some repairs," Xander replied casually. He spent the day in town, gathering information about Hollister from carefully worded questions at the saloon and livery. He learned that Hollister kept mostly to himself, but came to town every 2 weeks for supplies. He had no known associates in the area, which was good. It meant Xander would likely only have to deal with Hollister himself. As evening approached, Xander rode back toward the Kruger ranch, taking a different route to avoid being spotted. He positioned himself on a hill overlooking the property and watched as Hollister went through his evening routine, again delivering what appeared to be minimal rations to the shed, before retiring to the house. This time, Xander waited until the small hours of the morning when sleep was typically deepest. The moon was obscured by clouds, providing better cover as he approached the shed. He carried a saddlebag containing the tools and food, along with a canteen of fresh water. At the window, he tapped softly. Olivia appeared almost immediately, as if she hadn't been sleeping at all. "You came back," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. "I promised I would," Xander replied. "I need to work on this door. Keep watch and signal if you hear anything from the house." He examined the padlock in the darkness, then took out the pry bar. With careful, controlled pressure, he worked on the hasp securing the lock to the door. It was slow, painstaking work, trying to avoid making noise that might carry to the main house. After what seemed like an eternity, the hasp began to give way. With a final push, it broke free, and Xander carefully removed the padlock. He eased the door open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. Inside, the stench of unwashed bodies and waste was overwhelming. Olivia stood just inside the door, the two youngest children now awake and clinging to her skirts. The oldest boy, still chained to the wall, was also awake, watching Xander with wary eyes. Only the middle child, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, remained asleep. "This is Xander Faulkner," Olivia whispered to the children. "He's going to help us." Xander nodded to them, then moved to examine the chains. They were secured with simple locks which he could file through given time. He started with the one binding the oldest boy. "What's your name, son?" he asked quietly as he worked. "Henry," the boy replied, his voice hoarse. "Henry Kruger." "Good to meet you, Henry. I'm going to have you free in just a minute." Xander worked steadily, the file making a soft, scraping sound against the metal. "How old are you?" 12, sir." Xander nodded. "You've been brave, looking after your mother and siblings. Your father would be proud." Henry's chin trembled slightly, but he squared his shoulders. "Thank you, sir." The lock finally gave way, and Henry was free. Xander moved to Olivia next, working on her chains while she held the youngest child, a boy of about 4, in her arms. "This is Howard," she said, stroking the child's hair. "The sleeping one is Harriet, and this is Harold," she added, indicating the middle boy of about 10 who stood nearby. "We'll have you all out of here soon," Xander promised as Olivia's chains finally released. "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said firmly, though Xander noted how she winced as she stood straighter. "The children, too. We've been confined, but Hollister lets us out once a day to use the outhouse. He doesn't want us too weak to work when he decides we've been punished enough." The disgust in her voice was palpable, and Xander felt his anger toward Hollister growing stronger. But now wasn't the time for revenge, it was time for escape. "I have food and water in my bag," he said, passing it to Henry. "Share it among yourselves while I keep watch." As the family ate slowly, carefully, trying not to make themselves sick after what had clearly been a period of near starvation, Xander peered out the shed door toward the main house. All remained dark and quiet. "We need to move soon," he said after allowing them about 15 minutes to eat and drink. "My horse is hidden in the trees beyond the north pasture. It's about a quarter mile. Can everyone make it that far?" Olivia looked at her children, then nodded. "We'll manage." "I can carry Howard," Henry offered, looking stronger already after the food and water. "Good man," Xander said. "Mrs. Kruger, you take Harriet. I'll help Harold if needed." With the plan set, they prepared to leave the shed. Xander went first, scanning the yard for any movement. Seeing none, he motioned for the others to follow. They moved slowly, staying low and in the shadows as much as possible. Howard clung to Henry's back, his small arms wrapped tightly around his brother's neck. Harriet was now fully awake, her eyes wide with fear but making no sound as she held her mother's hand. Harold walked beside Xander, occasionally stumbling on the uneven ground but never complaining. They were halfway across the open yard when disaster struck. Howard, perhaps overwhelmed by the tension and excitement, began to cry, not loudly, but in the stillness of the night the sound carried. Xander froze, as did the others. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a light appeared in an upstairs window of the main house. "Run," Xander hissed. "Toward those trees. I'll hold him off." Olivia hesitated. "I can't leave you. Go," Xander urged. "Your children need you. I'll be right behind you." With a last, uncertain glance, Olivia gathered her children and hurried toward the tree line. Xander turned to face the house, drawing his revolver. He didn't have to wait long. The front door burst open, and Thomas Hollister emerged, rifle in hand. He was a big man, just as Xander remembered from the war, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard now streaked with gray. "Who's there?" Hollister called out, raising his rifle. Then he spotted movement as Olivia and the children neared the trees. "Stop right there," Xander stepped forward, placing himself between Hollister and the fleeing family. "It's over, Hollister." Hollister swung around, his rifle now aimed at Xander. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Faulkner, Xander Faulkner, you remember, I'm flattered." Hollister's face contorted with rage. "You're meddling in what doesn't concern you. Those are my prisoners, my property." "They're human beings," Xander said coldly, "and you've committed enough crimes against them already. They're trespassing on my land. That woman refused to leave what's rightfully mine. We both know you have no legal claim to this property, Hollister. Your true nature hasn't changed since the war, still preying on those weaker than yourself." Hollister's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle. "I should have killed you back in Virginia when I had the chance." "You can try your luck now," Xander said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. For a moment, they stood locked in a standoff, neither man moving. Then Hollister's rifle shifted slightly, not toward Xander, but toward the trees where Olivia and the children had disappeared. It was all the provocation Xander needed. His revolver fired, the shot echoing across the yard. Hollister staggered, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the ground as he clutched his shoulder. Before he could recover, Xander was on him, knocking the rifle away and delivering a solid blow to Hollister's jaw that sent him sprawling. "You've lost, Hollister," Xander said, standing over the fallen man. "The law will deal with you now." But Hollister wasn't finished. With surprising speed for a wounded man, he drew a knife from his boot and lunged at Xander. The blade sliced through Xander's shirt, drawing blood along his ribs before he could twist away. They grappled in the dirt, Hollister fighting with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. Despite his wound, he was still powerful, and Xander found himself struggling to keep the knife from finding its mark again. Finally, Xander managed to slam Hollister's wrist against the ground repeatedly until the knife fell from his grasp. A well-placed punch rendered Hollister unconscious. Breathing heavily, Xander bound Hollister's hands with the man's own belt, then tied his feet with rope from a nearby hitching post. Only when he was certain Hollister was securely restrained did Xander allow himself to examine his wound. The cut was painful but not deep, it could wait. He hurried toward the trees where Olivia and the children had fled. He found them huddled together just beyond the tree line, fear evident on their faces as they watched the confrontation from afar. "It's over," Xander assured them. "Hollister won't hurt you anymore." "You're bleeding," Olivia said, moving toward him with concern. "It's nothing serious. We need to get moving. Hollister's secured for now, but I want to get you all to safety before he comes to." They made their way to where Midnight was tethered. The horse snorted softly at their approach. "We can't all ride," Olivia said, looking at the single horse. "No, but we can take turns. The town's not far, about 5 miles. We'll manage." They set off, with Howard riding in front of Xander while the others walked alongside. Every so often, they would stop to rest and switch riders, with Harriet or Harold taking a turn on Midnight's back. As they walked, Olivia told Xander more of what had happened. After her husband died of fever 2 years earlier, she had struggled to keep the ranch going. Hollister had appeared 2 months ago with forged papers claiming Jacob Kruger had borrowed money from him and put up the ranch as collateral. "I knew it was a lie," Olivia said, her voice tight with anger. "Jacob would never have done that without telling me." But Hollister had somehow convinced the bank in Austin. When I refused to leave, She glanced at the children walking ahead with Henry. "He locked us in that shed, said we could work as his servants once we learned our place." Xander's hands tightened on Midnight's reins. "He'll pay for what he's done, Mrs. Kruger. I promise you that." They reached Redemption Creek as dawn was breaking. The town was just beginning to stir as they made their way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mills, a graying man with a weathered face, was clearly shocked at the sight of Olivia and her children. "Mrs. Kruger, good Lord, woman, where have you been? We all thought you'd left the territory after selling the ranch to Hollister." "That's what he wanted everyone to think," Olivia said bitterly. "The truth is he imprisoned us, Sheriff. This man, Xander Faulkner, rescued us." Sheriff Mills looked from Olivia to Xander, taking in the latter's blood-stained shirt and grim expression. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Kruger." "It's the truth," Xander confirmed. "Hollister is tied up at the ranch now. You'll find a shed with chains where he kept them prisoner." Mills studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I always thought there was something off about Hollister's story. Too convenient, him showing up with those papers right after everyone thought you'd left." He reached for his gun belt hanging on a peg. "I'll ride out there now with my deputy." "Hollister's dangerous, Sheriff," Xander warned, "and he won't go quietly." "Noted," Mills said grimly. "Mrs. Kruger, you and your children can wait here. There's a cot in the back room if you need to rest." "Thank you, Sheriff, but what I need most is a bath for my children and myself, and then to see about reclaiming my home." The sheriff nodded in understanding. "The hotel has baths. I'll speak to Mrs. Patterson about arranging rooms for you, no charge." "I appreciate that," Olivia said, her dignity intact despite her ragged appearance. As the sheriff left to round up his deputy, Xander escorted Olivia and the children to the hotel. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, was initially shocked at their appearance but quickly rallied when she understood the situation. "You poor dears," she said, ushering them inside. "I'll have baths drawn immediately and find some clean clothes for all of you." "I can pay," Xander began, but Mrs. Patterson waved him off. "Nonsense. The Krugers are our neighbors. We take care of our own here in Redemption Creek." While Olivia and the children were being settled, Xander had his own wound tended to by the local doctor. It required a few stitches but was, as he'd thought, not serious. "You were lucky," Dr. Wilson said as he finished bandaging Xander's ribs. "A little deeper and it might have hit something vital." "Wouldn't be the first time I've been lucky," Xander replied, putting his shirt back on. He returned to the hotel to find Olivia and the children transformed. Clean and dressed in borrowed but respectable clothing, they looked like a proper family again, though still thin and bearing the shadows of their ordeal in their eyes. "Mr. Faulkner," Olivia said, rising from where she'd been sitting with the children in the hotel's small parlor. "We can never thank you enough for what you've done." "No thanks necessary, Mrs. Kruger. I'm just glad I was passing through when I did." "Was it really just chance?" she asked, studying him. Xander hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I knew Hollister during the war. He was a cruel man then and clearly hasn't changed. When I heard his name in town, I was curious." "Then we're fortunate for your curiosity," she said with a small smile. Later that day, Sheriff Mills returned with his deputy and a bound, surly Thomas Hollister. The former lieutenant had a bruised face and bandaged shoulder, and glared at Xander with undisguised hatred as he was marched to the jail. "Found everything just as you said," Mills told Xander and Olivia. "The shed, the chains, all of it. And I telegraphed Austin about those papers Hollister had. Turns out there's been reports of similar fraud in other territories. He's wanted in both Colorado and New Mexico." "What will happen to him?" Olivia asked. "He'll stand trial here first for what he did to you and your children. After that, the other territories will get their turn with him." "I reckon he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars, Mrs. Kruger." Relief washed over Olivia's face. "And my ranch? It's still legally yours, far as I can tell. Those papers won't hold up in any court once the fraud is exposed." As the days passed, Xander found reasons to delay his departure from Redemption Creek. He told himself it was to ensure Hollister faced justice, or to help Olivia and her children resettle at their ranch. But in truth, he was drawn to the quiet strength and dignity of the widow Kruger. Olivia and the children returned to their home, finding it in disarray but structurally sound. The townspeople, ashamed at having believed Hollister's lies, rallied to help. Men from town came to repair fences and broken furniture, while women brought food and household items to replace what had been damaged or stolen. Xander worked alongside them, using skills he'd learned on his family's ranch in his youth. He repaired the roof of the main house, rebuilt the chicken coop, and helped round up the cattle that had scattered during Hollister's negligent stewardship. Henry stuck close to Xander, eager to learn and clearly seeing in him a male figure to look up to after 2 years without his father. The boy was bright and hardworking, quickly absorbing everything Xander taught him about ranch work. "You're good with him," Olivia observed one evening as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. "He respects you. He's a fine boy," Xander replied. "You've raised him well despite everything." "I've done my best," she said, looking out at the darkening land. "But a boy needs a man to show him the way sometimes. Jacob was a wonderful father." "I'm sure he was," Xander said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the Texas plains surrounding them. "Will you tell me about him?" Xander finally asked. "Your husband?" Olivia smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Jacob was kind, hardworking, and honest to a fault. We met in St. Louis, where my father was a merchant. Jacob came to buy supplies for his ranch, and he courted me for 6 months before asking me to marry him. I was 19 and had never been west of the Mississippi, but I loved him enough to follow him to this wild place. You don't regret it, coming here?" She considered the question seriously. "No, even with everything that's happened. We had 10 good years together. He gave me my children and this land. There's a freedom here I never found in the city." "You're a remarkable woman, Olivia Kruger," Xander said, surprising himself with the use of her first name. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "And you're a good man, Xander Faulkner, better than you seem to believe." He looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "I've made my share of mistakes. Haven't we all? It's what we do after that matters." The next day, Xander received word that the circuit judge would arrive in a week to hear Hollister's case. It meant another delay in his departure, but he found he didn't mind. Life at the Kruger ranch had fallen into a pleasant routine. Mornings were for work tending the cattle, repairing the buildings, planting the kitchen garden. Afternoons often included lessons for the children, with Olivia teaching reading and arithmetic, while Xander showed Henry the practical skills of ranching. Evenings were for stories around the table after dinner, with even young Howard contributing tales of imaginary adventures. Harriet, who had been the quietest of the children initially, was slowly coming out of her shell, often asking Xander to describe the places he'd seen in his travels. Harold, the middle boy, remained somewhat wary of Xander, but even he began to warm up when Xander taught him to whittle, patiently showing him how to carve a small wooden horse. It was a life Xander had never expected to find again after losing his family home. The weight of loneliness that had been his constant companion for years seemed to lift a little more each day. One afternoon, as he worked in the barn repairing a broken stall door, Olivia brought him a glass of cool water. "You've done so much for us," she said, watching him work. "I don't know how we'll manage when you leave." Xander took a drink, using the moment to gather his thoughts. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Olivia. You survived Hollister. You'll manage the ranch." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but the children have grown attached to you." "Especially Henry. He's a good boy. He'll make a fine rancher someday. And what about you, Xander? Where will you go when this is all settled? He set down his tools, wiping his hands on his trousers. I haven't thought that far ahead. I've been drifting for so long it's become a habit. Maybe it's time to break that habit, she suggested quietly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a possibility. But before either could speak further, they heard Henry calling from outside. "Riders coming, Ma." They hurried out to find Sheriff Mills approaching with another man, tall, distinguished, and clearly a man of the law. "Mrs. Kruger," Mills called as they rode up. "This is Judge Harmon, come early for the Hollister trial. He wanted to see the scene of the crime, so to speak." Judge Harmon dismounted with the ease of a man accustomed to travel. "Mrs. Kruger, my deepest sympathies for what you and your children endured. Sheriff Mills has briefed me on the case, but I'd like to hear the details from you directly if you're willing." "Of course, Judge," Olivia replied. "Would you come inside? I can offer you coffee while we talk." As they moved toward the house, the judge noticed Xander. "And you must be Mr. Faulkner, the man who discovered Mrs. Kruger's situation and apprehended Hollister." "Yes, sir," Xander confirmed. "I'll want your account as well. You'll be the key witness in this trial." Inside, Olivia prepared coffee while Xander entertained the children in the adjacent room, allowing her to speak freely with the judge about the details of their captivity. Later, Xander gave his own account of finding them and confronting Hollister. "It's an open and shut case," Judge Harmon declared after hearing both stories. "With the evidence of the shed and chains, plus the fraudulent papers, Hollister will face the maximum penalty." "Thank you, Judge," Olivia said. "Knowing he'll face justice gives us some peace." After the judge and sheriff departed, promising to send word when the trial would begin, Xander found Olivia in the kitchen, her hands braced on the table, head bowed. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded without looking up. "Just relieved and tired. I've been holding myself together for so long, first for the children during our captivity, and now through all of this." Without thinking, Xander moved to her side and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Olivia." She turned to him then, and to his surprise, stepped into his embrace. He held her as she finally allowed herself to weep for her late husband, for the ordeal she and her children had endured, and perhaps for the uncertainty of their future. When her tears subsided, she didn't immediately pull away. Instead, she looked up at him, her face mere inches from his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. For a moment, it seemed as if they might kiss, but the sound of the children returning from their chores broke the spell. Olivia stepped back, wiping her eyes, and Xander moved to the window, giving her time to compose herself. "Mama, can we have biscuits with dinner?" Harriet asked, bursting into the kitchen. She stopped short at the sight of her mother's reddened eyes. "Are you crying?" "Just a little, sweetheart," Olivia said, bending to hug her daughter. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy too." "Are you happy, Mama?" Harriet asked seriously. Olivia glanced at Xander, a small smile forming. "Yes, I think I am." The day of Hollister's trial arrived clear and hot. The entire town of Redemption Creek turned out to witness justice being served. Olivia testified with quiet dignity about the imprisonment and mistreatment, while Xander detailed finding them and his confrontation with Hollister. The defense was weak, with Hollister's appointed lawyer unable to counter the physical evidence and multiple witness testimonies. When Judge Harmon pronounced the sentence 20 years hard labor for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and fraud, a cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. As Hollister was led away in chains, he glared at Xander. "This isn't over, Faulkner," he growled. "Not by a long shot." Xander merely stared back, unmoved by the threat. Hollister would spend decades behind bars. By the time he was released, if he survived his sentence, he would be an old man, his capacity for harm greatly diminished. That evening, a celebration was held at the Kruger ranch. The townspeople brought food and drink, and a local fiddler provided music. It was a way for the community to both welcome Olivia and her children back, and to apologize for not seeing through Hollister's deception sooner. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit, and couples began to dance in the cleared space of the front yard. Xander stood to the side, watching as Olivia moved among her neighbors, accepting their good wishes with grace. "You should ask her to dance," came a voice beside him. Xander looked down to find Henry watching him intently. "I'm not much of a dancer, Henry," Xander replied. "Ma likes dancing. Pa used to dance with her on Saturday nights, even if it was just the two of them in the kitchen." Xander studied the boy. "You wouldn't mind if I danced with your mother?" Henry considered this seriously. "You saved us, Mr. Faulkner, and you've been teaching me ranching things like Pa would have. I reckon if anyone's going to dance with Ma, it ought to be you." Touched by the boy's words, Xander nodded. "Thank you, Henry. That means a lot." He made his way through the crowd to where Olivia stood talking with Mrs. Patterson from the hotel. When there was a pause in their conversation, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Kruger, would you do me the honor of this dance?" Olivia looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Faulkner." He led her to the makeshift dance floor as the fiddler began a waltz. Placing his hand respectfully at her waist, he guided her into the steps of the dance. She moved with natural grace, following his lead easily. "I didn't take you for a dancer," she said, smiling up at him. "My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would disgrace her at social gatherings. She taught you well." As they danced, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the music and the growing connection between them. Xander realized with sudden clarity that he didn't want to leave not Redemption Creek, not this ranch, and certainly not this woman and her children. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her hand. "Olivia," he said softly, "I've been thinking about what you said about breaking the habit of drifting." Hope flickered in her eyes, and I think maybe it's time I stopped running from what I want." "What do you want, Xander?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A home, a purpose." He paused, gathering his courage, and if it's not too soon or too forward, a chance to see if there might be something between us worth building on. A smile slowly spread across her face. "It's not too soon. Not when you feel right, like something I've been waiting for without knowing it." The celebration continued around them, but they remained in their own world, the promise of a future together beginning to take shape. As summer gave way to fall, Xander became a permanent fixture at the Kruger ranch. He and Henry worked side by side to prepare for winter, repairing buildings, stocking firewood, and ensuring the cattle were ready for the colder months ahead. Olivia's garden thrived under her care, providing vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Howard, now 5, followed Xander everywhere, a constant shadow full of questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how horses knew which way to go. Harriet had appointed herself Xander's helper in the kitchen on the nights when he cooked, solemnly informing him that his biscuits needed more butter. Harold, still somewhat reserved, had nonetheless begun to seek Xander out for advice on his whittling projects, which grew increasingly ambitious. Xander found himself falling into the rhythms of family life with surprising ease. The nightmares that had plagued him since the war gradually became less frequent, replaced by dreamless sleep born of honest physical labor and the comfort of belonging. His relationship with Olivia deepened as they worked together to rebuild the ranch and care for the children. They often sat on the porch after the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, the simple events of the day. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. One such evening in late October, with the first chill of autumn in the air, Xander reached for Olivia's hand as they sat side by side on the porch swing. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, squeezing his hand. He smiled. "Perhaps, but necessary sometimes." He turned to face her. "Olivia, these past months have been the happiest I can remember since before the war. Being here with you and the children, it's given me purpose again." "You've given us so much too, Xander. Security, help, laughter. The children adore you." "And how do you feel?" he asked, his heart hammering in his chest. She met his gaze steadily. "I think you know, I've fallen in love with you, Xander Faulkner. I wasn't looking for it, wasn't expecting it after Jacob, but there it is," his breath caught. Though they had grown close, neither had spoken of love until now. "I love you too, Olivia, more than I thought possible, and I want to ask you something." She waited, her eyes never leaving his. "Will you marry me? Let me be a husband to you and a father to your children." "I know I can never replace Jacob. I wouldn't want you to," she interrupted gently. "Jacob will always have his place in my heart and in the children's memories. But there's room for you too, Xander. Room for a new beginning." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. "Yes," she said simply, her smile radiant in the moonlight. "That's a yes." He drew her close and kissed her then, a tender promise of the life they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the end of Redemption Creek's Main Street. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, the community having embraced Xander as one of their own after his role in bringing Hollister to justice. Henry stood proudly as Xander's best man, taking his role very seriously. Harriet scattered wildflower petals down the aisle, while Harold carried the rings on a small cushion he had embroidered himself under Mrs. Patterson's tutelage. Howard, not to be left out, appointed himself the official greeter, solemnly shaking hands with everyone who entered the church. Olivia was radiant in a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. When she walked down the aisle toward Xander, he felt a swell of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This woman, who had endured so much and emerged with her spirit intact, was choosing him to share her life. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, promising to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. There was dancing and laughter, and even Harold unbent enough to join in a lively reel with one of the girls from town. As evening fell, Olivia and Xander stood together, watching the festivities. The children were being taken to stay with Mrs. Patterson for a few days, giving the newlyweds some time alone before settling into their new life as a family. "Happy?" Xander asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "More than I can say," she replied, leaning into him. "I never expected to find love again, especially not after what happened with Hollister. You've given me back hope, Xander." "You gave me that first," he said softly. "When I found you in that shed, I saw someone who refused to be broken by cruelty. You inspired me, Olivia." She turned in his arms to face him. "Then we've saved each other, haven't we?" "I believe we have," he agreed, bending to kiss her. Later, after the guests had departed and the children had gone with Mrs. Patterson, Xander and Olivia stood in the doorway of their home, truly theirs now, in a way it hadn't been before. The ranch house felt different, filled with the promise of their future together. That night, They came together as husband and wife, their love for each other expressed in tender touches and whispered words of devotion. Xander, who had known so much violence and loss in his life, found healing in Olivia's embrace. And she, who had endured captivity and fear, found freedom in his love. In the morning they woke wrapped in each other's arms, the sunlight streaming through the window illuminating their new beginning. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked, noting the thoughtful expression on her husband's face. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," Xander replied, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, "and that I can't wait to see what our life together will bring." "Neither can I," she said, smiling, "though I suspect it will involve a great deal of chaos once the children return." He laughed. "I wouldn't have it any other way." In the years that followed, the Faulkner-Kruger ranch prospered. Under Xander and Olivia's joint management, they expanded their cattle operation and added horses, developing a reputation for quality stock throughout the territory. Henry grew into a fine young man, working alongside Xander and learning every aspect of ranching. By 18, he was effectively the foreman, respected by the hands they eventually hired as the operation grew. Harriet revealed a talent for numbers and helped Olivia with the ranch accounts, while showing a surprising aptitude for veterinary care, often assisting when animals were sick or injured. Harold's quiet nature belied a sharp mind. He excelled at school and eventually expressed an interest in law, inspired perhaps by Judge Harmon's role in bringing justice to their family. Howard, the baby of the family, remained joyful and curious, always ready with a question or observation that often made the adults stop and think. 2 years after their marriage, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Xander's mother. The entire family doted on the baby, with even the now teenaged Henry taking turns rocking his little sister to sleep. 3 years later, a son joined the family, James Jacob Faulkner, named for both Xander's father and Olivia's first husband, a tribute to the past that had shaped them both. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, disputes with neighboring ranchers over water rights, and the normal challenges of raising 6 children of varying ages and temperaments. But through it all, Xander and Olivia faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. They never forgot how they had found each other. Every year on the anniversary of Olivia and the children's rescue, the family would gather for a special dinner. It wasn't a morbid commemoration, but rather a celebration of their freedom and the unexpected joy that had come from such dark circumstances. On one such anniversary, when Elizabeth was 10 and James 7, the family sat around the large dining table Xander had built when they needed to accommodate their growing brood. Henry, now 22 and recently engaged to the schoolteacher's daughter, raised his glass in a toast. "To Pa," he said, using the name he had gradually adopted for Xander over the years, "for having the courage to investigate when something didn't seem right, and for teaching me that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery are the quiet ones." "To Ma," added Harriet, now 17 and blossoming into a beautiful young woman with her mother's strength and her own distinctive spirit, "for showing us what real strength looks like, and for never giving up hope even in the darkest times." Harold, 19 and home from his first year of law studies in Austin, raised his glass next. "To family, both the one we were born with and the one we chose." Young Howard, now 15 and nearly as tall as Xander, grinned. "To midnight rescues and happy endings." "To new beginnings," said Elizabeth solemnly, trying to mimic her older siblings' formality. Little James, not to be outdone, stood on his chair despite Olivia's gentle admonition. "To love," he declared, sloshing his milk slightly in his enthusiasm. Xander and Olivia exchanged a look filled with all the love and shared history of their years together. He reached for her hand across the table, squeezing it gently. "To chains broken," he said softly, "and hearts mended. And to the unexpected paths that lead us home," Olivia finished, her eyes shining with love for the family they had built together. As they all drank to the toast, Xander looked around at the faces of his children, for they were all his children now, regardless of blood. He thought of the lonely, haunted man he had been when he rode into Redemption Creek that day so long ago, and marveled at how completely his life had changed. He had arrived a drifter with nothing but painful memories and a restless spirit. He had found a purpose, a home, and a love that had healed wounds he'd thought would never mend. What had begun as a chance encounter, a passing curiosity about a name from his past, had led to the greatest blessing of his life. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Olivia wrapped her arms around Xander from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Happy?" she asked, echoing the question he had asked her on their wedding day. He turned in her embrace, gathering her close. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," he replied honestly. "You and the children. You saved me, Olivia, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she reminded him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And we'll keep doing so every day for the rest of our lives." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Xander reflected that sometimes the most precious treasures are found in the most unlikely places, even in a dilapidated shed on an abandoned ranch in the wilds of Texas. Sometimes, the chains that bind us can lead to the very freedom we never knew we were seeking. And sometimes, a man riding through life with no destination finds himself exactly where he was always meant to be, the end.